Welcome back to Good Morning Kenya. This is Transformative Leaders. My name is Mike Megwe, and we shift gears now and we talk about sanitation in urban areas. And to help me with this conversation is none other than Nancy Ngao, who is Government Affairs, Policy and Advocacy at Fresh Life Limited. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
How is your Monday going?
The Monday is going great. Yes. Thank you, Mike.
No. When we talk about sanitation, first of all, let's start with the basics. When we talk about sanitation, what are you talking about?
So for a lot of people, then I can ask you the question. Yes. Let's shift gears. When you hear the word sanitation, what do you think of?
It's about it's the environment, cleaning the environment, keeping yourself, even your house, clean, living in conditions that can sustain life without talking about things like maladies and things like that.
Okay. So for a lot of people like you, Mike, yes. Sanitation is, washing your hands, keeping your environment clean, as you said. But why haven't you said a toilet?
Oh.
Because sanitation starts with containment, which is the toilet.
Yes.
Where the sanitation waste goes.
Yeah.
So sanitation is just layman's from the containment bit, which is the toilet, where you go do your business, all the way until how that waste is either safely treated, disposed of, and upcycled to viable products.
Yes.
Yes.
Are there types of sanitations that we can look out for?
Yes, so there's what a lot of people know, which is the conventional types of sanitation systems, which is sewer.
Yes.
So you're conversant with sewer, that's what everybody knows. You use the toilet, you either push a button, pull on a lever, and you don't worry about where that business has gone to.
Yeah.
So those are sewered systems. There are also non-sewered sanitation systems. These are systems that are not connected to the sewer, for example, like a pit latrine. And also an example is what we do at Fresh Life, which is what we call container-based sanitation, or a urine dry diverting toilet, which is a more technical term. But basically it just means it's a dry toilet where the waste is separated at the source, and the waste is contained in like a container or a cartridge. So instead of a pit latrine where it's a never-ending pit, the Fresh Life toilet is a dry toilet that has a container or a cartridge, and then there are two compartments, one for liquid waste, one for solid waste. So that's what we mean by the waste is segregated or separated at the source, and then now emptied. So there are very many different technologies. So not just what you know as either sewered systems or pit latrine.
When you talk about sanitation in urban centers, we are looking at cities like Nairobi. Talk to me about where we are in terms of sanitation, making adequate sanitation accessible to the people, especially in the cities and also around the world.
Okay, yes, we can start globally so that it doesn't look like it's a developing country issue. Sanitation is an issue all around the world with 3.6 billion people, and that's half of the population lacking access to clean and safely managed sanitation. Now, when we say safely managed sanitation, we're not just talking about access, that here's the toilet, so you have a toilet. We're also looking at where does this waste go? Is it safely treated, disposed of, or reused into viable byproduct, so safely managed. So we keep that term for the rest of the discussion. So globally, as I said, 3.6 billion people lack access to sanitation, safely managed sanitation, and more so the underserved. These are the people who are living in informal settlements. And when we come down to Kenya, we have over 10 million people living in Kenya in these informal settlements, and they do not have access to clean and safe sanitation. So around 60% of these people don't have access, and in cities like Nairobi. So right now, according to government statistics, we are, as a country, we are at 32% of safely managed sanitation. So you can see that's a huge gap in terms of people who don't have access. So while the government has plans to connect people to sewers, especially like a city like Nairobi, what can we do in the meantime? When we think about sewered systems, there's a cost that is attached to it. Remember, when we think about informal settlements, where are the sewers going to be laid down? These are unplanned communities. So that would mean people would have to be displaced. Again, we are rushing against the clock 2030 is fast approaching.
Yes.
So will we be able to achieve 100% access to sanitation if we only think about sewage systems? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that don't connect people to sewer.
Yes.
Connect people to sewer.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, what can we do? And that's where organizations like Fresh Life come in to bridge the gap with other more innovative solutions to ensure that everyone is at some level of safely managed access sanitation.
Yes, we'll talk about innovation later on, but talk to me about, see, there's a move from rural to urban areas, and this translates to population density. Now, how does that add to the existing challenges in terms of sanitation, and how can we best address that?
Okay, so just as we've said, there's high population coming in, rural, urban.
Yeah.
If you think of the informal settlements in Nairobi, they are unplanned,
Exactly.
right? So think of when they are putting up these settlements, it's always just the house. There's never a thought of the sanitation facility.
Yes.
So that way they're coming up without following the urban planning guidelines for growing cities. So this increase in population, and by the year 2050, we'll have around 3 billion people living in informal settlements. That's a lot of people globally. So we are going against there's time, the time is running out, the number of people are increasing, so we need to act now to ensure that sanitation planning is part of growing cities.
Now, talking of informal settlement, is there one specific thing that we need to do to ensure that there is enough and safe sanitation initiatives within those areas?
Mike, I wouldn't say one thing we need to do.
Yes.
There are several things we need to do
Exactly.
as a country. And number one is getting our already existing policies working. Policy is the foundation of any planning, right? We need to be guided by something. There has to be a blueprint. So if we get working policy and regulatory frameworks for sanitation, we'll be able to have that first step. So historically, sanitation has been lumped up with water.
Yes.
So when you speak about water, people automatically assume that sanitation is somewhere in there. So while they are correlated,
Yes.
we need to start seeing sanitation as a standalone sector to be able to plan properly for sanitation. We're talking about investment planning. There's a huge investment gap for sanitation. So currently it's around 8 billion USD in Kenya alone, with 3.2 billion USD needed just for urban sanitation services. So there's a huge investment gap right now. Of course, the government is spending less than they are required to, and with 2030 fast approaching, we need to be thinking bigger. So we need more investment for sanitation. We've talked about innovation. What technologies can we use to supplement what the government is planning in terms of connecting everyone to the sewer line? While the government is doing that, how can we adopt more innovative financing, more innovative sanitation solutions that are not sewer, maybe non-sewered or other types of sewers like simplified sewers. So opening up to more innovation. We've talked about investment planning as well. We need more money to come into sanitation.
Yes.
And we need to stop assuming that water is equals to sanitation. It's not always the case.
Yes.
Another thing is clear institutional frameworks. As I said, sanitation has been lumped up with water for a very long time. So you'll find sanitation in water, sanitation in health, sanitation in environment. So how can we streamline to ensure that sanitation has a voice of its own? And I'll say this, we can't talk about education without talking about sanitation. Children need to be in school and they need to have safe access to sanitation. We can't talk about climate and environment because now that's like the exciting thing we're talking about. Climate change, climate action, mitigation, adaptation.
Yes.
We can't talk about this without talking about sanitation. There's a study that was done in Uganda. 50% of the greenhouse gases that were produced came from the sanitation value chain. So it's a sector that we are literally sleeping on, that is causing a lot of harm to the environment.
Yes.
You can't talk about health without talking about sanitation. A huge chunk of the national health budget goes to treat communicable diseases. We are always talking about cholera outbreak, year in, year out. Where is this coming from? Contamination of water, contamination of food. Children are dying every year from sanitation-related diseases. So you cannot talk about health without talking about sanitation.
Yes.
You can't talk about women without talking about sanitation. Women are the ones who are at home most of the time, interacting with these sanitation facilities that are below standards. We're also talking about security for women. If I don't have a toilet in my plot, I have to walk at night. Where is the security for that? So we really need, there's not just one thing, but we can start with the main thing is how do we ensure that sanitation is being seen and recognized as a standalone sector, because it's really affecting and a lot of the cross-cutting sectors.
Where do we fall short? Is it in terms of policy formulation or implementation?
I would say implementation. Kenya is a very rich country of policies. We have a lot of policymakers, very smart, very educated. We have wonderful and very rich documents. But how do we get to the last mile, which is now the implementation? But I will give credit to the government of Kenya. We have a draft National Sanitation Management Policy, which is the first standalone national policy here in the country. It has been domesticated from the Africa Sanitation guidelines, which were developed by AMCO. I won't get so much into the policy jargon and conversation, but it's showing goodwill from government that we do need direction and through policy. So this is a draft policy, and it's currently undergoing the parliamentary review process. So there's a lot that the government is putting in regarding policy.
Are there, when we talk about sanitation in urban areas, what are the infrastructure limitations that hinder access to the best sanitation initiatives?
When it comes to infrastructure,
structural limitations.
Structural limitations, of course, the main thing is space. When we think of informal settlements, as we said, they're unplanned, right? They're unplanned, so there are no plans or regulations and standards that are governing how these informal settlements are coming up. So there's no space, right? So we need to start thinking about how can we have more safe sanitation options for these communities that are looking into these limitations of space, looking into limitations of time, as well as topography. You know, there are areas, for example, in Mukuru, that cannot handle the traditional trunk sewers. So looking at topography as well, how can we adjust?
The role of government is also very important in as far as access to better sanitation is concerned. In your own assessment, where does the national government and the county governments meet in enhancing or making access to adequate and good sanitation initiatives?
So sanitation is a devolved function, so it lies with the county for implementation. Of course, the role of national government is policy, right? In a nutshell, policy, but implementation, it's at the county level. So for the role of government is the mandate holder. It is their role to provide clean and safe sanitation for all Kenyans. Private sector, for example, Fresh Life, we are here to complement what the government is doing. We don't have a mandate, but again, the government cannot go at it alone. This is something that we need to come together and solve as a country, different sectors. So private sector has the technology, the innovation, access to resources, even funders, etc. But government has the mandate, and of course government can, the things that government can do, which is creating incentives for private sector to function and to provide these services where the government cannot. And that's where we talk about partnerships between the private sector and the public sector. So how can we come together to ensure that these people, especially the underserved, get this access?
And also, speaking of innovation, are there technologies so far? I know you talked about the toilet that you talked about. What other innovative technologies can be put in place to enhance safe or access to safe sanitation? Yeah.
There are quite a couple. So I can reiterate the one that I talked about with the Fresh Life toilet. That one is the container-based toilet, where the waste is segregated at the source. So if you think of like a pit latrine, why do pit latrines have an odor? Because the liquid waste is touching the solid waste, so they're in contact. So there's that smell. Again, it's not emptied as regularly, right? But if you think of a urine dry diverting toilet, the waste is segregated at the source. So there's a container for the liquid waste, a container for the solid waste, so they don't touch. That way the smell goes down, there's no odor. Another thing is, another innovative part of this toilet or this type of technology is once you use the backside, which is for the solid waste, you're able to, it's a dry toilet, so you don't need water. So again, water saving. You scoop some ash or some sawdust and just a small cup, a small scoop, handful onto the area that you have used, and it's dried. So that way the odor, you don't get the issue of odor, and the moisture comes out, right? So we need to be looking at, in terms of innovation, what is water saving? Water saving in terms of space as well, looking at the environmental impact, production of greenhouse gases. So if you think of a pit latrine that is not emptied as regularly, there's low oxygen because it's deep. So methane is produced faster. But if you think of a container toilet, it's shallow. I'm trying to be as simple as possible. It's shallow, so there's high oxygen or aerobic, if you remember your biology. So and then it's emptied regularly, so it's lower methane that is produced. So we need to start thinking about innovations in that way. Climate, looking at space as well, the odor as well. So that's something very small. Just taking a product that is readily available in these informal settlements, which is sawdust, and just putting it into the toilet will make sure that it's dry and that there's no smell. Right? And then again, looking at the circular economy approach to sanitation. There's a lot of money in solid waste, right? When you take this solid waste, what can you do with it? You can upcycle it into viable agricultural products, like animal feed, biomass briquettes, and fertilizer as well, from human waste. So how can we also capitalize from this solid waste? So those are the kind of thoughts and innovation.
You know, you talked about recycling, and my thoughts took me to some places in Nairobi where there's a lot, heaps and heaps of solid waste, garbage, and you talked about recycling. Are we not doing enough? Because recycling is also part of sanitation. Are we not doing enough in ensuring that this solid waste is recycled?
Yeah, we are definitely not doing enough. And that's why there's a lot of room and opportunity for partnerships, also for other private sector organizations to come up, for government to also partner with these organizations to ensure that this waste is safely managed. I can give an example of what, as Fresh Life, we do with our human waste. So the solid waste, once we collect it and transport it safely out of these communities we serve, we work with a partner company called Regen Organics that now mix the human waste and other solid waste, other organic waste. So the waste you're talking about from markets, from slaughterhouses, abattoirs, etc. And now that waste is upcycled to viable agricultural products. So it's working in Kenya. It's working. We are proof that it is working. And there are a lot of organizations as well that are using different technologies to upcycle human waste. Instead of doing the landfills, the waste that is ending up also in our rivers, in the environment. So there's a lot that is already happening, but there's definitely room for growth in that component of the value chain, which is the upcycling. So who is supposed to sensitize people on matters sanitation, especially in urban areas? Is it a preserve of the government, the private sector, or is it a general, a concerted effort to ensure that people know the importance of sanitation? Again, mandate of the government, but of course, as other sectors, private sector, CSOs, etc., we're here to work with the government. So we stand governed by the government and by government plans, right? But we say the government can't go at it alone. So we have to be part and parcel of this. So working with the government to create awareness, working with the government to build these systems, working with the government to provide these innovations, and then government creating these incentives, creating sound policy and regulation and standards to allow private sector to function. So it's a dance for two.
Yes. Yeah. Discuss the interplay between the urban sanitation and environment sustainability, and also how improving sanitation helps in preserving the environment and mitigating pollution, and even by extension climate change.
Okay, so we've seen what our rivers look like. I don't know if you've seen the rivers in Nairobi. I heard from a colleague, a much older colleague, who said that when he was growing up, they were fishing in rivers in Nairobi. Which of course for me is very surprising, because when you think of what the rivers look like now, they're full of waste, and more so sanitation waste. So because of this lack of planning and how communities are growing very quickly, especially in the informal settlements, we are moving towards unsafely managed sanitation options like pit latrines, and also what we call the pour flush toilet. So a pour flush toilet, just think of like it's a toilet in your house. You use it and then you pour water. But where the water goes, it's not connected to the sewer. For some, it's connected to the sewer network, but for others, it just goes open, just out into open waterways or straight into the river. Right? So, and then we talked about the greenhouse gas emissions that come from poorly managed pit latrines. Also thinking of the emptying, right? Because we're not just looking at access, we're looking at where does this waste go. So you can see some of them are going directly into the rivers. You've seen the manual pit emptiers who come empty the pit and then wait either at night or in the wee hours of the morning to empty, and then go dump it in the open environment or into the rivers. So we have that aspect also of outside of what is happening with the unsafely managed toilet, what is also happening with the waste. So we've seen what has happened to our rivers. We've seen the president commissioning the Nairobi Rivers Commission to address the pollution of these rivers. So even as we think of how do we clean the rivers, we go back to what is the cause of these rivers being at the state that they're in now. And a high percentage of this waste in the rivers is sanitation waste. So we've talked about the greenhouse gas emissions, talked about the diseases as well. So there's a lot, it's cutting across different sectors. So we need to start thinking about outside of the access, that here's the toilet, where is this waste going as well?
So in a city like Nairobi, is it possible to achieve a 100% transition to non-sewer sanitation?
No, let me be, what we want is 100% citywide inclusive sanitation. And what this means is different sanitation options that are working together in one area. So of course Nairobi is more sewered than other cities. So let the sewer continue, operation and maintenance of said sewers, let it continue, let the government continue executing their sewer plans. But in the meantime, how can we ensure that those who don't have access to sewer also have access to safe sanitation? So we're not saying that non-sewer sanitation is the best option. We are saying that it's an alternative while we continue to figure out how the government can ensure that everyone has access. There's the National Water and Sanitation Investment Plan, where the government was setting targets for sanitation for 2030. Initially, it was 80% sewer, 20% non-sewered, but this has since been revived to 60% non-sewered, 40% sewered. So you can see now there's a higher call for non-sewered sanitation, but it doesn't mean 100% non-sewered. It means together we will get to 100%. But we need to accelerate access for those who don't have that reach of sewer to make sure that by 2030 we are achieving 100%.
You mentioned something about the private sector, and I want to know how a city like Nairobi, for instance, can capitalize on, is there a way that we can capitalize on private public partnerships to enhance sanitation within the city?
Yes, so there are examples like I've given of what Fresh Life is doing, and I've said it is the mandate of the government. We're working within the parameters set by government. So an organization like Fresh Life, we work through formalized partnerships with the utilities at the county level. Remember, sanitation is a devolved function. So as I said, private sector has the innovation, we have the technology, we have the resources and access to additional resources. What we need from the government is basically clear the way for private sector to be able to function. So these are sound policies, regulation, very clear regulation, especially on roles of government and roles of private sector. So where does government start and end? Where does private sector come in? So that we are streamlined, right? Because I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of people who are doing many things under sanitation, especially private sector. So how do we move away from the pilot syndrome? I mean, if you think of a country like Kenya, there's so many innovations. So how can government support these pilot projects to scale? That way we can increase access. There's a lot of room for everyone. So we need to move away from this pilot syndrome and adopt like a more long-term approach for sustainability.
Speaking of sustainability, how can local communities, because sanitation, I believe, starts at the lowest level, how can local communities be empowered, so to speak, to enhance sustainable sanitation initiatives?
So the government has done a lot to end open defecation, because over the years, open defecation has been decreasing. So of course you have a responsibility as a person living in the community, and of course just as a Kenyan when it comes to sanitation, to ensure that you're using the right facility. But sometimes that facility is not there, especially in informal settlements. Sometimes the facility is not safe. You know, you can go to a pit latrine, say for example, if you live in Kisumu, there's a high water table and the toilet collapses. We've seen toilets collapsing, right? So that's where open defecation comes in. I don't want to die using the toilet, so I will just do my business in the open. Or remember the whole flying toilet story. So when it comes to the community, there's a balance between especially looking at behavior change. Because if I've grown up, my entire family has been using open defecation. My parents, my grandparents, my parents and myself, there has to be that mind shift of you need to almost demand for clean and safe sanitation for yourself, right? And also know how to use these clean and safe sanitation options. So there's a lot of awareness creation that happens in the communities, of course led by the public health departments at the county level. They do a lot of community awareness activities in partnership with other private sector entities, community-based organizations as well, that now bring the communities together through barazas, through the village elders, just to teach them about what is clean and safe sanitation, how can I access the same.
Are there lessons that we can infer from developed access to better sanitations? So planning and informed planning, right? So you can't say I'm going to put sewer here, or I'm going to put this non-sewered sanitation option here. So it should be what is the actual need. So needs assessment. Let's get some data. So data, very important. Let's get data. What is the situation looking like in Mukuru? How many people live in Mukuru? What are the sanitation options that exist here in Mukuru? What is the need? What is the cost? How do we plan? How are the phases? Who do we want to impact? What are the impacts we're even measuring? Is it health? Is it environment? So a lot of planning and data needs to go into ensuring that we get to a place where we have that access. So countries like, for example, the Philippines, data-driven. So those are the things we need to aspire to. What about, talk about the forums or the conference that is coming up about?
So as I've said, the government is putting in quite a bit to ensure that we are hitting our 2030 goals.
Yes.
So led by the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation and the Water Sector Trust Fund, they will be hosting a conference. This is this week, actually from Wednesday to Friday, 6th to the 8th.
Yes.
It's called the Water and Sanitation Investment Conference, where they're looking to bring in a lot of partners, so funders, private sector, government, to highlight some of these key issues that we've spoken about, of course at that higher level, and to see how we can invest in water and sanitation. Yes, so it's a good conference to look out for. A lot of learning, a lot of partnerships, I'm sure, will come from this conference. So it's good to see the government convening something like this.
As we come to a close, are we heading in the right direction in as far as access to better sanitation is concerned, according to you?
Yes, we are heading in the right direction. I can say in the 3 years that I have been closely involved in sanitation, we have definitely made strides. We can see that there's a lot of buy-in from government, even just with this conference happening. We've seen sanitation companies, water and sanitation companies changing their names. You know, it was water and sewerage, so a lot of them are now water and sanitation, to now officially take up that mandate. We've seen them setting up pro-poor units or informal settlement departments to now focus on addressing water and sanitation in underserved areas. So there's a lot of work that is going in. 10 years ago, an organization like Fresh Life was doing this technology for the first time. Now we have standards for on-site sanitation or non-sewage sanitation. So there's definitely a lot of movement in the sector, and we are very hopeful to see what will happen in 2030. Thank
you so much for making time for us.
Thank you.
We are glad you came to talk about issues to do with sanitation. We have been talking to none other than Nancy Ngao, who is a Government Affairs and Policy Advocacy at Fresh Life Limited. This has been Transformative Leaders segment. My name is Mike Megwe. Don't go too far. Vivian will be back with more. Good morning.